Hi everyone, hope you're doing well, and thanks for joining me. Previously, I have done a video analyzing the EQ capabilities of the TASCAM Model 12. And in that video, I did mention that I'll do another video analyzing the compressor setting. I had few requests, so I decided to do this video, and today we're going to analyze the compression setting of the TASCAM Model 12. This way, we can better understand what the compressor knob does at each of its settings. In understanding and knowing the numbers, we can then decide and judge how we want to compress our audio. Of course, as always, numbers may not mean anything. We always try to use our ears to judge whether the audio we are compressing, if we are compressing too much or too little. So without any further delay, let's get started. I should mention that this video might be a little bit lengthy because it takes a while to test every parameter of the compressor. But first thing first, let me show you and demonstrate the setup. I've got a test tone in my DAW, and then the audio coming back from the USB is fed into channel 6. And I do have the mode switch into PC. That means the signal for this channel is actually coming from the PC. And the first thing on this channel strip is the compressor. My EQ is all flat. And then that test signal will come through the compressor, which will be testing it. And then the fader is at 0. We don't need that. And I'm sending that test signal to auxiliary 1. And the auxiliary 1 is going to the master auxiliary. And this is a physical output at the back of the unit. And I have a small patch bay lead that is connected to the output of the auxiliary 1 back into the input of 6. And you might think, hang on, what are you doing? That's like looping the input to the output. Not quite. Because I have the modes set to PC, that means the signal will come to the compressor, auxiliary, out and back into 6, and then it's just not going to continue down to the part of the channel strip, but it's actually just going to go back straight into the USB. So I have output, compressor, and then back input again. Of course, you can use a different channel, but you can use the same loop within one channel. If this is a little bit confusing, just let me know, leave a comment, and I'll explain a little bit further. Just to demonstrate that the signal part is correct, you can see on my DAW, I've got the test tone on channel 1, pipeline, which is the hardware routing plugin in Studio One, Professional, that allows me to connect any physical output back to the input. And then I've got my level meter, which is at the output on channel 3. And if I turn it on, a sine wave at minus 12 dB, you can see right here. Okay, so I've done all of the adjustment of the levels, making sure that everything is at minus 12 dB. Well, minus 11.8 is the return. So I'm sending minus 12 dB with no compression on, it's turned off. And my input here on the TASCAM, not sure how it will turn up. You can actually see it as minus 12 dB, which is that line as well. Perfect setting. And everything else is adjusted so that the input coming back into the DAW is also round about as close as I can get. Remember, these are knobs that you can't really adjust to the dot. But 11.8, I will say that's 12 dB. So next, I'm going to test the attack and release time using my measuring software. Again, I'm going to use 3 settings here on my dial, at minimum or turned off, and at 9 o'clock position, 12 o'clock position, 3 o'clock position, and at maximum. Of course, there's in between settings as well. It'll take me all day to do all of that. So that's the settings that I'm going to use and for all of this test. So let's turn on our test signal. And we can see on the screen how the signal is going up. It's turned off at the moment. Of course, attack and release time will be about 0 because the compressor is not engaged, it's turned off. Now you might also notice that it's flashing red because that red signal comes on at minus 3 dB of the signal as it's just before it's clipping, and I am sending 0 dB signal. But you will notice later on how that red clip LED won't be on for too long, as the compressor will compress those signals. So let's get started. Let's set it to at 9 o'clock position. And here we are. We can actually see what the compressor is doing at attack and release times. You can see the signals, how there's a peak. That's the original signal that's being sent. And the blue shaded one is what is coming back. So it's capturing that peak signal. And we can see that at this position, the attack is 4 milliseconds and the release time is about 30 milliseconds, roughly. Now let's move that dial into the 12 o'clock position. Now, of course, now we've got more compression. You can see our signal is further down as well, but we are testing the attack and release time. Now the attack is just over 7 milliseconds. I'll say because of, analog knob positioning, that could be anywhere between 7 or 8 milliseconds. And the release time has now extended to 40 milliseconds. It was 30 milliseconds before, now it's 40 milliseconds, so it's longer release time. And let's go into testing at 3 o'clock position. Again, we can see compression is happening because the signal is way lower. And now we have an attack time of about 8 milliseconds and release time of 48, I'll say there about 50 milliseconds or so. So 8 to 50 milliseconds at 3 o'clock position. And let's go to the maximum position on the compressor. Again, we've got about 7 or 8 milliseconds of attack and 48 or 50 milliseconds of a release time. So those are the figures that we are looking at. So the more compression you give, the longer the release time is. And apart from getting from at 9 o'clock until 12 o'clock position, 9 o'clock you are getting about 4 milliseconds attack and 30 milliseconds release. Otherwise, it's pretty much constantly sort of improving. At the end of this video, I will put out a list of all the settings that we get. And in our final testing, we are going to be testing the threshold and ratio, as well as any auto gain and any knee for the compressor. So we'll find out all about that. Again, the same positions on the dial. I've got 0, 9, 12 o'clock, and 3 o'clock, and at maximum as well. So let's find out how we go. This is a little bit slower testing because it's incremental testing going up the levels to find out the threshold and the ratio for the compressor. So we'll let it run. Of course, the ratio is 1:1. There's no compression, and it's not going to detect the threshold because there is no threshold. It's just at the maximum. And we can also see that there is, it says there is no auto gain. So it's all good. So let's increase that to the 9 o'clock position on the dial. And then we'll find out how much change there is, if any. Okay, we do. The threshold is set at about minus 4 dB or thereabouts. I guess it all depends on where my finger, how far it touches the dial. And the ratio says minus 58 dB. But I think because of how it's working, it's a high ratio. Now it says 75 to 1 ratio at minus 4 dB. In my previous test, I did get about 100 to 1 at minus 6 dB. But again, this all depends where, it's fiddly to touch there. So there we go. So it's at this position, 9 o'clock position, I think it's working as a limiter. So that way, any loud signal coming through, it's trying to limit it. And you can see how the red clip LED doesn't even come up, even though it's sending 0 dB level. You can tell that by this dial here that I'm sending. So that's limiting far enough that it's not even clipping the incoming signal digitally. Of course, if I turn this gain knob further up, it will clip the input preamp, which also will digitally clip the signal. But what we're looking at is here, which is digital signal coming. So that's that one. Let's go and start testing at 12 o'clock position. At 12 o'clock position, our threshold is now down to minus 20 dB. And the ratio, I'll say about 10 to 1. Which is not bad ratio. So that's a nice place. High compression at, when your signal gets above minus 20 dB, signal coming in, it's going to compress it. And we do have a little bit of auto gain as well. So it's giving about 3 dB, 2.84, but I'm just going to round it up to 3 dB of gain. And there is no knee. So as soon as the signal goes above the threshold, it just slams it down to whatever the ratio is. So that's what we're looking at, about 10 to 1. And let's go into 3 o'clock position on the dial. I'll have to let it run one more time so that we get much better calculation. It says 5.3. I think that's about right. I think it's about minus 30 dB threshold. Okay, so about 5 to 1 ratio, and minus 33 dB or minus 30 dB is depending on how fiddly your finger is and how you adjust that. And we do have about 8 dB of gain there, auto gain. So even though it's reducing, 5 to 1 ratio, what we are getting some auto gain there. So you got to watch out that as the more compression you're putting, the more gain you are getting as well. Just to make sure that it's all correct. Yep. And let's go to the maximum position and see what reading we get. Okay, this is a rough one, but probably close to. It's 4 to 1 ratio at the max position and minus 30 or minus 40 dB, I think, the threshold level. And we are getting about 10 dB of gain, auto gain. And knee, probably, no, the knee is 0. I have to make sure that we make one full cycle run so the analysis software can analyze the data and give us, as close as possible reading. Yep, and I think what we're seeing on the screen is correct. So it's 4 to 1 ratio, and minus 40 dB is a threshold, and you're getting 10 dB of gain at 0 dB of knee. So that's what the compressor is doing. So the higher the dial, the lower the ratio, but the lower the threshold as well. So using it around the 12 o'clock is probably a good compression ratio, because you are getting 8:1, which is quite common for vocals, for guitars, and other instruments. And then it's only adding about 3 dB of makeup gain, which is fine. And the threshold is at minus 20 dB as well. And if you are using, and you've done a correct gain staging, and most of your signal are about minus 12 dB, where the line is on the screen. I do have a video regarding that. I might leave a card or a link in the description. You can watch that video. That means you are getting nice, smooth compression around the 12 o'clock dial. Again, as I mentioned, you can always use your ears to judge whether you are compressing too much or you're not compressing enough, and you can use that. But the higher you go, the less ratio for the compression. And then at about, I'll say, just before, between, I don't know, I'll say 8 o'clock or thereabouts, that's when you might get really high, high ratio and low threshold. That way, I guess it's not trying to digitally clip the audio that's going down the channel strip. Well, I hope you found this video interesting and informative as well. Now you know how the one-knob compressor works. And if it was helpful, make sure you give me the thumbs up. And as always, thanks for watching and have a great time making music, and I'll catch you in the next one.